Hello guys, welcome back to yet another video. My name is Yoshi and welcome on my YouTube channel. This series is all about short to the point tips and tricks regarding photography and videography. And in this brand new video I will talk about HDR photography and what it actually is. First of all, I really need to explain what HDR stands for, and HDR actually means high dynamic range. Now, if you're wondering what the best HDR sensor or camera is in the world, well, it's the human eyes. Basically, all we got to see around us are very high dynamic ranged images. In other words, we can see a lot of details and shadows, highlights and contrasty rich areas in general with our naked eyes. Camera sensors nowadays are not that sensitive and therefore we invented HDR photography. In other words, snapping a photo with higher details in the shadows, a photo with normal lighting conditions and a photo with more details in the highlights. In other words, we merge three different photos together to obtain the same dynamic range as we can see with the naked eyes. Let's jump straight into some more details and show you the power of HDR images in your cameras nowadays. Talking about the camera I'm currently using for shooting this video, which is a Sony A7 III. With Sony cameras it's really easy to obtain HDR images. First of all, you can set everything automatically and use the exposure bracketing feature. This feature lets you choose between 3, 5 or even 9 different images being taken at different exposure levels. And that way you can obtain as much details as possible in all different lighting conditions. And then later in Lightroom or Photoshop or your favorite editing program, you can merge all those photos together and then you will have most details in all areas of the shot. It's really important to use a tripod for this feature, otherwise it will be really hard to shoot everything and get a beautiful aligned image. It is possible at faster shutter speeds to shoot from the hip, but I don't recommend you to shoot without any tripod or stabilization. You have different options available when shooting in brackets regarding the stops you jump in between the different images. First of all, you can decide to use 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, 1 or 2 or even 3 stops in between the different shots. I have a similar function used for snapping this particular photo using my DJI Mavic Air, which has also built in this function, and basically it's called HDR photo. And now one important thing when shooting HDR is that you always pick the raw files. So when using a DJI camera, it's the DNG files that are shot and stored in a different folder, because DJI also merges all those photos already together and creates a JPEG file in your drone as well, but I don't recommend to edit that photo. Can you clearly see the difference between a normal photo and an HDR image? I clearly can. And I hope you learned something new and you understand the importance of shooting HDR. Now, one final question I need to answer today is, why shouldn't you then shoot all the time in HDR? Well, HDR is not a mode you should use whenever you're shooting action-packed photos or photos with a lot of motion in it, because it certainly slows down the camera's performance, because you need to snap 3 photos in a row, and if your subject is moving, yeah, well, then you will get motion blur, the subject won't stand in the same position and frame, and it will be really hard to align all of those photos in post-production. So in other words, it's good for landscape photography at harsh conditions or conditions with a lot of contrast in it. So really dark shadows or really strong highlights. In those conditions, it's the best way to obtain the best of both worlds. I will show you one more photo in which I used HDR for bringing back a lot of details, and this is a shot from Hangifos. And Iceland. And yeah, well, as you clearly can see, the rocks in between the canyon really were dark because of the harsh light conditions. It was around noon, so the sun was at its highest position. It was a crystal clear sky, so really harsh conditions, and I wanted to obtain some details in the shadows, but I didn't want to blow up the highlights, so I did shoot with brackets and merged all three photos together to obtain at least a bit more details in the shadows and not blow up the highlights. But for that I also needed a tripod. So to summarize up, HDR is not suited for all kinds of photography, but it can really help you to bring back those details in the shadows and highlights at harsh light conditions. If you're snapping photos with your smartphone, just leave HDR mode turned on by default and you will get the best photos for sure. That being said, I really hope this video was a bit informative, you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!